She didn't leave love. She left the illusion. Have you ever wondered what happens to the woman who stops replying? Not because she's hurt, not because she's playing hard to get, but because she no longer wants to be found. What if her silence wasn't heartbreak, but ascension? What if she didn't vanish because she was broken, but because she was finally whole? There's a woman the world doesn't talk about, not because she failed at love, but because she chose something far more radical, to stop begging for it. She didn't explode. She didn't cry. She didn't post sad quotes on Instagram. She disappeared. And in that disappearance, something terrifying began to take shape. Not bitterness, not revenge, but clarity. She's not cold. She's not heartless. She's something far more dangerous. She has no more questions, and she owes no one an answer. This isn't a story of heartbreak. It's the story of a woman who walked so far into her own shadow. She came out the other side untouchable. The fairy tale was written long before she was born. It whispered to her in lullabies, tucked itself inside bedtime stories. It dressed itself as Disney princesses and wedding vows. You are not whole, it said, until someone chooses you. So she waited, polished herself, smiled at the right angles, learned how to be soft enough not to scare him, but smart enough to be interesting. She became the performance of a woman, not the experience of one. But no matter how many times she adjusted, dimmed her voice, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, something inside her stayed hollow. And one day, she saw it. Not in a dramatic moment, but in the quiet realization that she was trying to earn something that should never have had a price. Carl Jung once said, "We fall in love with those who carry the unconscious parts of ourselves." What she was craving wasn't a man, it was the mirror, the reflection of her lost self. And once she saw that mirror, once she saw that it was her projection, she was kissing not a person she stopped reaching. The moment the illusion cracked, the grief was unbearable. Not for the person she was leaving, but for the version of herself that had spent years waiting. She didn't cry over him. She cried over how small she made herself to keep him. Jung calls this withdrawal of projection. It is one of the most painful spiritual surgeries you can go through. It's when the fantasy dies and reality begins. She stopped looking at messages that never came. She stopped rereading old conversations trying to find meaning in the meaningless. She stopped analyzing his silence like it was a riddle she could solve. She realized something earth-shattering. She was never asking for love. She was asking to be seen. And now that she could finally see herself, she no longer needed to be visible to anyone else. Her withdrawal wasn't an event. It was a quiet revolution. She didn't block him. She didn't announce her exit. She simply stopped being available to him, to others, to a world that only wanted her for her light, but never dared to sit with her in the dark. She didn't become bitter. She became selective. And in a world addicted to access, selectiveness is rebellion. Her presence used to be a gift. Now her absence became her power. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate." She didn't stop believing in love. She stopped believing in fate that made her the supporting character in her own story. And so she vanished. Not because she was afraid of love, but because she finally loved herself enough to stop waiting. They say every woman has a breaking point, but this wasn't hers. This was her awakening point. The silence around her grew louder, not the kind that begs to be filled, but the kind that reveals what you've been hiding from. Jung warned, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Most people think healing feels like light, but real healing begins in pitch black. She entered a place she didn't even know existed, a hallway of echoes, voices from her childhood, You're too much. Stop crying. Be nice. Don't make a scene. The ghosts weren't monsters. They were her old masks. She saw herself not as she wanted to be, but as she truly was, fragmented, furious, forgotten. And for the first time, she didn't try to fix it. She let it burn. You've seen the Instagram posts, the soft lighting, the journaling, the crystals, but shadow work is not pretty. It's not self-care. It's self-confrontation. She screamed into her pillow until her throat burned. She relived every betrayal she had minimized. She admitted the ugliest truths. She had tolerated mistreatment and called it strength. She had romanticized abandonment and called it depth. She had confused being needed with being loved. Jung says, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And so she did. She stopped being the strong woman who held it all together. She became the woman who fell apart on purpose, with intention, because some parts of you have to rot before anything real can grow. It wasn't just her shadow. She saw her mother's sadness, her grandmother's silence, her lineage of women who whispered their pain and wore their sacrifice like makeup. The patterns weren't just personal. They were ancestral software. She saw how the women before her bent their spines to hold together men, homes, reputations, and broke quietly when no one was watching. And now here she was, bleeding the same wound, crying the same tears, almost repeating the cycle. Almost. But instead of repeating the legacy, she rebelled. She said the forbidden words, "This ends with me." Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he forgot to mention you must first become who you truly are not. She became cruel, withdrawn, unapologetic. To the world she was becoming harder, but inside she was becoming clearer. The nice girl was dying. The agreeable girl, the pleasing girl, the desperate girl. And in her place, something ancient emerged. The wild woman, the intuitive one, the one who knows without needing proof, the one who feels the lie in a kiss, the one who can walk away without turning her head. She no longer asked, "Am I lovable?" She began to ask, "Is this love even worthy of me?" And that changed everything. There comes a moment when she no longer recognized the reflection in the mirror, not because she looked broken, but because she finally looked empty. Not sad, not angry, not dramatic, just void. The woman she had performed all her life, the one built from expectations, roles, compliments, tolerances, was gone. No more pick me. No more please understand. No more checking her phone for someone's crumbs of attention. She no longer needed to be seen. She needed to see. This, Jung would say, is the sacred space between identities, where the ego dissolves and the self begins to emerge. But make no mistake, it's terrifying. She used to measure her worth by responses, messages, likes, male attention. Being desired made her feel real. But now, she could walk into a room and not care if anyone turned around. And that scared her, not because she missed the attention, but because it revealed how addicted she had been to external existence. Carl Jung warned, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But she had no choice. She was now face to face with it. No filters, no fans, no feedback. And in that stillness, she heard it whisper, "You are not what they wanted. You are not what they needed. You are what you were too afraid to become." Before this void, she used to contort herself into every shape, just to be acceptable. Smaller, softer, less opinionated, more agreeable. She smiled when she wanted to scream. She said it's okay when her soul was bleeding. She called it maturity, but it was erasure. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." He didn't mention that before acceptance comes the rage. Rage at the wasted years. Rage at the men who loved her weakness and fled from her depth. Rage at herself for participating in her own invisibility. But now, there was no one left to blame. Not even herself. This wasn't self-love. This was self-resurrection. She began to notice small things. How she breathed differently alone. How she spoke when no one was watching. How her laugh changed when it wasn't trying to make anyone comfortable. She watched herself. Not with judgment, but with presence. She was becoming her own mirror, her own validation, her own witness. And that was something no one could take away again. Jung believed, those who look outside dream. Those who look inside awaken. She was no longer dreaming. She was remembering. She didn't make a big announcement. She didn't write a manifesto. She simply became unreachable. Not because she was hiding, but because she stopped being so easily found. Her energy wasn't something to access. It was something to earn. She stopped responding to the hey. She stopped explaining her boundaries. She stopped tolerating shallow company. People called her cold, distant, dramatic. But in truth, she was finally operating on sacred frequency. She wasn't punishing anyone. She was protecting what she had rebuilt. And if that meant being misunderstood, so be it. Because when a woman stops needing to be liked, she becomes dangerous, not to others, but to every system built on her obedience. When she re-emerged, there was no glow-up, no dramatic haircut, no declaration of independence plastered on social media. She simply started living as if she had nothing to prove. No one noticed at first, until they did, until they felt it. The difference in her gaze, the stillness in her body, the terrifying calm of someone who no longer negotiates her presence. She no longer tried to be liked. She didn't soften her voice, didn't pretend to agree to keep peace, didn't say maybe when she meant no. Jung would call this individuation the irreversible emergence of the true self. She wasn't rebelling. She was remembering. She still longs for connection. Yes, for touch, for intimacy, for witness, but not the kind of love that devours her time, silences her intuition, or asks her to apologize for her depth. She wants the kind of love that can sit in silence with her and not flinch when she cries without words. She no longer wants a man to chase her. She wants one who can meet her, stand beside her, not to save, fix, or complete her, but to walk beside her in full presence. No more kings looking for queens to decorate their palaces. She is not furniture in anyone's life. She is the kingdom. And love must be sacred enough to worship her clarity, not just her curves. There's something strange that happens when a woman becomes unavailable in the soul. She doesn't do it intentionally. She just becomes untouchable. People who used to drain her now feel uncomfortable in her presence. Not because she changed her behavior, but because she changed her energy. She walks slower now, speaks less, sees more. She smiles without obligation, leaves without guilt, and listens to her body like it's the only voice that matters. She doesn't rise to defend herself. She doesn't argue to prove her worth. Her silence now says, "You don't have the language to reach me anymore." She stopped asking psychics, stopped pulling cards, stopped reading signs in the stars to know what he's thinking. She began pulling answers from her own gut, trusting her body's tension more than his words, feeling the truth behind the text, sensing the energy beneath the smile. Carl Jung would call this the integration of the unconscious. Her intuition isn't a superpower. It's a reclamation of everything she once suppressed to be digestible. She no longer doubts herself. She doubts them. And that shift, it rearranges the whole room. She doesn't scream when she's crossed. She vanishes. She doesn't beg for clarity. She creates it by leaving. She doesn't punish. She prioritizes. And this drives people insane, because the old version of her would have stayed explained, compromised. But this woman, she doesn't explain anymore. She exits. And when she exits, she doesn't look back, because she knows what doesn't respect her peace doesn't deserve her presence. They say she changed, that she's different now, colder, harder, less available, less romantic. But the truth is far more dangerous. She didn't become difficult. She became discerning. She didn't lose her ability to love. She lost her willingness to abandon herself, to feel loved. She still wants to be touched, still wants to be held, still wants to be chosen, but only by someone who doesn't ask her to forget how long it took to become this version of herself. Because before she became this clear, she begged, she bent, she bled. And now she carries herself like a woman who has nothing to prove and everything to protect. She knows what she costs. And for the first time in her life, she's willing to not be affordable. She will not explain why she said no. She will not justify why she doesn't smile when she's uncomfortable. She will not apologize for choosing solitude over shallowness. She will not dim her intensity, just so someone else can feel brighter. Because she has lived through the death of the girl who needed to be liked. And in her place now stands a woman who radiates a different kind of beauty, the kind that can't be commodified, manipulated, or contained. So if you see her now, walking alone, head high, heart steady, don't assume she's broken. Assume she's free. This message was never meant for everyone. It wasn't for those still chasing attention, or those who fear the silence of their own soul. It was meant for the one who's already started disappearing, the one who's stopped explaining herself, the one who's begun walking through the world like her truth is more important than her approval ratings. It was meant for you. So if you felt something in your bones, if you remembered who you were before they convinced you to shrink, to smile, to stay, then this is your mirror. You are not too much. You are not too late. You are not too hard to love. You're just too real to be tolerated by people who are still addicted to pretending. Leave a comment if you've ever chosen silence over begging. Share this with the one woman you know who no longer fits in, but still chooses to stand tall. Subscribe not because this was beautiful, but because it was true. Because when a woman stops needing to be loved, she becomes something the world cannot name. And in that space, she doesn't wait for permission. She writes her own mythology. Welcome back. We've been waiting for you.